Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 5. As always, we're going to start at quarterback first, but there are some buys to factor in and some players out with injury. You cannot start Lamar Jackson out with a hamstring injury until at least the bye week, in my opinion. Brock Purdy did miss this week, so Mac Jones got the start last night. Joe Burrow is out until at least December, if not the year. J.J. McCarthy out another week. They are on bye next week. We'll see if Wentz retains the job. And then on bye, we have Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, Michael Penix Jr., and Aaron Rodgers. All of the quarterbacks here on the screen cannot be started in your lineup. None of them will play in Week 5. So that's it for the unranked players. Before we get into the ranks at the position, I would like to bring up the matchups. This chart shows you every single defense from most points allowed per game on the left, and it goes down to the fewest on the right. Those are the blue dots on this chart, quarterback points per game allowed, and that does govern the spot in which they are showcased on the chart. Most to least fantasy points allowed. In red, how many of those points are being attributed to just touchdowns? Because touchdowns really move the needle in fantasy. They are critical. Without touchdowns, you miss out on a lot of upside. So I would like to zoom in on just the red stats on this graph. This is a breakdown of those red stats I just showed you. How many points per game are being allowed based on touchdowns? In blue, we have passing touchdowns per game from every defense. And then in red, how many rushing touchdowns? Because rushing touchdowns are 50% more valuable. They're worth 6 points instead of 4. So if we can chase after the rushing touchdowns, those matchups in particular, predicting which quarterbacks will get that extra 2 points most likely does add a lot of extra confidence in my ranking. So I would like to bring up the red stats on this chart specifically. Which defenses are allowing at least a 50% chance of scoring a rushing touchdown? There's a lot that have not given up a single rushing touchdown this season. We'll ignore them. There's a lot that have also given up one rushing touchdown on the season. And since it's only Week 5, let's ignore them as well. Let's focus on the 5 teams that have been pretty bad at stopping running quarterbacks this season. If you're searching for a rushing touchdown, the Chargers and Dolphins have been the most susceptible defenses in that category. Both teams have given up 4 rushing touchdowns on the year. And when it comes to the Chargers, that's actually more rushing touchdowns per game than passing touchdowns. If you're facing the LA Chargers, it's way more likely that the quarterback is going to scramble for a rushing touchdown than throw for multiple. So this week, Jayden Daniels, I think, is a lock to score a rushing touchdown. They gave up one to Jaxson Dart. They've been bad all season in that department. He's also without Terry McLaurin. Deebo Samuel hasn't practiced either. I expect Daniels to score some points, and without many options, I think he'll do it himself in the red zone. I love Jayden Daniels to score a rushing touchdown this week. The Dolphins are also just as vulnerable. They're pretty bad in the secondary, but just as bad as the Chargers in that department. 4 rushing touchdowns allowed on the season, and they get Bryce Young this week. Bryce Young scored a rushing touchdown last week, and in his final 7 games of 2024, he also dropped 5 rushing touchdowns in that sample size. Bryce Young has 6 rushing touchdowns in his last 12 starts. Bryce Young is actually relatively likely to score a rushing touchdown this week. The Dolphins are a very good spot. I also think that the Cowboys, Steelers, and Bills are also very good matchups to chase in that department. And while the Steelers are on bye, the Cowboys and Bills have given up 2 on the season. 50-50 shot per week that happens, and they get some good running quarterbacks opposite them. Dallas goes against Justin Fields, and Buffalo goes up against Drake Maye on Sunday night. Both of those quarterbacks offer a lot of value with their legs. Both of them scored a rushing touchdown last week. So the reason I really wanted to focus on this at the top of the video is to share this lineup specifically that I placed earlier today. I feel very confident in this entry on Underdog. Every single projection is a value, in my opinion. I believe all 4 of these quarterbacks will score a rushing touchdown. And if you join me on this lineup, $10 will return $575. Now, the odds on Underdog are always changing, but this is a massive multiplier, 57.5x on only 4 player projections. And based on the data, I feel very confident all 4 players have a good shot to do that this week. So wanted to bring it up. New customers on Underdog using code BLUNT on sign up. Play their first 5 and get $100 in bonus funds. That is the deal this season I have to offer. Underdog has partnered with the channel, and let's try and make them regret it. $5 gets you $100 in bonus funds for new customers with sign up code BLUNT. The link is in the description. This is the entry I recommend. Drake Maye, Jayden Daniels, Justin Fields, and Bryce Young all hire half a rushing touchdown. I believe they will all score on the ground this week. The stats really like all of their matchups for them to do that. This is the entry I am going with this weekend. I love the payout. $10 for $575. Sign me up. Let's go with these 4 QBs. Anyways, back to the original chart that I showed to you at the first part of this video. And obviously touchdowns are very important. The teams that give up the most points per game from touchdowns are all on the left side of the chart. That is where the best matchups do reside. So let's bring up the best of the best spots to be in. Dallas and Miami are by far better than any other team. 6 points more than just the 3rd best matchup on the season is Dallas. Justin Fields is a must start, just like he was last week. He got a top 2 matchup for the 2nd week in a row, and last week he did phenomenally with that spot. Love Justin Fields this week. A must start, in my opinion. I'm also giving Bryce Young an upgrade. We mentioned the rushing touchdown odds for him against Miami. They have a terrible defense, so Bryce Young deserves an upgrade, but mainly just a backup, not a top 10 play in general. So maybe not the safest start, but does expect to play better this week against the Dolphins. And then Pittsburgh is on bye. They're the top 3 defense this season. Baltimore is top 4, and they get CJ Stroud, but Stroud and the Texans have looked awful on offense, so not excited to trust him. The Saints have also been a top 5 matchup. They did just face Josh Allen last week, though, so maybe a bit misleading, but 10 plus points per game based on touchdowns, and maybe Jaxson Dart is also a very good start against the Saints. The Bills rank top 6. Other than the Ravens, they've only locked up the Jets. They've also played Miami, and then last week it was New Orleans. So even with some terrible matchups opposite them, they've been a big upgrade, a top 6 matchup against Drake Maye. I think Maye is a must start. Then we have the Bucks against Sam Darnold, the Commanders against Justin Herbert, the Bears are on bye, and then the Chargers against Jayden Daniels, and the Jets against Dak Prescott all rank as top 10 matchups this week, all an upgrade overall. When it comes to the bad matchups, though, there are some minus spots to be in, and the biggest downgrade does go to Jalen Hurts against Denver this week. The Broncos are no joke. Maybe Jalen Hurts is a downgrade in this spot. Houston, also a tough spot, so Cooper Rush in a new spot for him. I don't know if I trust him in the lineup. Not going to start him in fantasy against the Texans. Minnesota, also a terrible matchup, so Dylan Gabriel making his rookie debut. Not going to trust him. The Falcons are on bye, so we catch a break with the bottom 4 matchup unavailable. The Panthers are legit on defense, so Tua gets a tough spot here against Carolina. San Francisco did not stop Matthew Stafford, so maybe you don't want to buy into this chart completely, but Stafford did look good with 3 touchdowns, almost 400 yards last night. Stafford was pretty good. Baker also gets a downgrade against Seattle. They have a very good secondary. The Chiefs have been good at stopping quarterbacks, 14.4 points against Trevor Lawrence. Not ideal this week. And then the Rams against Mac Jones were a downgrade on paper. So is Tennessee against Kyler Murray. And lastly, Cleveland against Carson Wentz on paper is a bad matchup. So that is it for the upgrades and downgrades. Now let's get into my rankings, where at number 1, it's now a tier all to his own. Josh Allen no longer shares this tier with Lamar Jackson because Lamar is out for at least 3 weeks with that hamstring injury. So not expecting him back until the bye. Allen is in a tier of his own, and he's locked in at QB1 in Sunday night primetime. He should be amazing. At number 2, I have Drake Maye. I mentioned it earlier. The Bills are a top 6 matchup, even though they've faced Rattler and Tua and Justin Fields. They are giving up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. So I trust Drake Maye. Not only is this game going to be a marquee matchup for them, the Pats only have 3 primetime games this season, one of them on Sunday, and then the other 2 are against the Giants and the Jets on Monday and Thursday. This is clearly the biggest game of the year for New England against their division rivals. So main attraction here, I expect a shootout. I love the Patriots offense this week. In terms of over-unders, Vegas has this as the highest point total on the week. Over-under 49.5. I think it goes over. I think Drake Maye will hang around and keep this game close with the Bills. I don't see very much defense in this matchup. So love Drake Maye this week. I think he's the best quarterback to start. Unless you have Josh Allen, I'd be benching every single quarterback for Drake Maye. I'm going to the Chargers game this week, and I really want to start Justin Herbert, but I also have Drake Maye on my roster. I'm benching Herbert for Drake Maye. That's how much I believe in Drake Maye's upside this week. I'm benching my boy. At number 3, I'm going to rank Justin Fields exactly where I ranked him last week. The Cowboys matchup is the best you can ask for. They just gave up 3 touchdowns to Romeo Doubs and 4 touchdowns to Caleb Williams. I expect Justin Fields to drop a lot of points on the Dallas Cowboys. Their defense is trash, and he also gets a minor revenge game against Matt Eberflus, the coach that let him go. Now he's a starter with the Jets. I think he will seek revenge against his former coach. We saw that he can drop a 50-yard house call in the run game as well from anywhere, and I expect Justin Fields to be elite. Same ranking as last week, a top 3 quarterback. You need to trust the best matchups on paper. The Cowboys have given up 6 points more than the 3rd best fantasy matchup on the season. If you're facing Miami or Dallas, you have to start that quarterback. Last week, Fields proved it against Miami. Got to start him against Dallas. At number 4, we have Patrick Mahomes at Jacksonville, and in my opinion, he's back. This offense has a lot of upside, especially once Rashee Rice returns, but with Xavier Worthy back on the field, game-breaking ability is back. I also think that Hollywood Brown and Tyquan Thornton, even Juju, are stepping up enough to feel really safe about the production from Mahomes. If he continues to scramble, even though he hasn't the last 2 weeks, you get an elite ceiling on top of it. But I still think against the Jaguars in primetime Monday night, Andy Reid with an extra day to prepare, going to dial up an elite game plan. They will be hot from kickoff. I expect the Chiefs to potentially blow out the Jags. There's a lot of blowout potential. I do not trust the Jags defense. So Mahomes, based on where you drafted him, is a must start in general. He's played very well this season. 4 touchdowns last week. I would keep starting him. A top 5 option, in my opinion. With no Lamar Jackson, he comes in at number 4. At number 5, I think we're dropping down a tier, but I still think based on 1 quarterback leagues, these quarterbacks are in your lineup this week. Justin Herbert versus Washington. I am benching him for Drake Maye, but there's only 4 quarterbacks I would bench him for. Drake Maye is one of them. So I'm going to believe in that, but I think Herbert has a very high floor against Washington. They've been a top 8 matchup on the season for fantasy purposes, and it's not like they have a secondary that scares you. I expect Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, and even Ladd McConkey to contribute. Even Omarion Hampton is getting it done in the passing game. So love the yak potential. While the offensive line is definitely a red flag for the Chargers, not enough to panic. I still think Herbert can play at an MVP level. I would still start him. At number 5, I see a lot of upside at home against the Commanders. They were kind of embarrassed last week. I expect Herbert to bounce back. At number 6, Jalen Hurts deserves a downgrade. It is the toughest quarterback matchup you can find against the Denver Broncos, but he is Jalen Hurts. At the end of the day, I can't rank him too low. He does move down the list, but only to number 6. I would still keep him in the lineup. If I had Drake Maye, I'd bench him, but against the Broncos, I still think Hurts offers a lot of rushing value. Given their corners opposite A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, I expect a rushing touchdown, at least one, for Jalen Hurts. So going back to that entry I showed you earlier, if you wanted to add Hurts rushing touchdown on top of it, you could. But last I checked, Underdog has removed the prop on Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown this week. I think they're just so positive it's going to happen. They don't want to lose any money. So Jalen Hurts, a lock for that. Definitely a safe start in general. Got to keep him in the top 10. At number 7, I'm going to start Jayden Daniels, if I have him this week, he is returning to the lineup and he is healthy. So the knee injury appears to be behind him. It's still in the back of my mind, definitely a factor to be concerned about. But in general, the main reason why I'm not ranking him top 3 isn't just the Chargers matchup, but also the fact that Terry McLaurin is out and Deebo Samuel has yet to practice this week. I do not expect Deebo on the field either. So the Commanders are not in good shape, but I do think Zack Ertz will step up. Daniels also has elite scrambling and rushing ability. They were very vulnerable in that department to Jaxson Dart, not just last week, but also across the season. They've been bad in that category. I mentioned it earlier. The Chargers have given up 4 rushing touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks. So I do expect Daniels to contribute in that department. They have also given up 41 rushing yards per game to opposing quarterbacks as well. I expect 10 points on the ground as a floor from Jayden Daniels. Everything else in the passing game is just a bonus. He will play well. I think he offers a 20-point floor, most likely against the Chargers. This game will be close. I don't think he rolls over. Give me Jayden Daniels as QB7, but he would be way higher if his knee was fully healthy and if Terry and Deebo were also active. Without them, he does fall down the list a bit. At number 8 in this tier, where I think he's a must start this week, is Daniel Jones versus Las Vegas. The Raiders are trash, especially on defense. There's no concern there. Colts offense is legitimately good, and they should have beaten the Rams or at least gone to overtime, if not for the A.D. Mitchell fumble through the end zone. So I do trust this Colts offense quite a bit. I think Daniel Jones is very legit. Behind Shane Steichen, there's elite play calling. They have a good offensive line. Really, the only risk here is if Jonathan Taylor just dominates and hoards all of the touchdowns. But the Raiders are a little bit better on defense against the run. I think there will be enough to go around. I think the Colts are going to drop 40 points on the Raiders this week. So want to start Daniel Jones. I was tempted to put him higher. However, hard to rank him above guys like Jayden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, and Mahomes. So at number 8, I might be too low, but I think he's a clear top 10 play. I would be starting Daniel Jones with confidence this week against the Raiders. At number 9, I did tell you to start Matthew Stafford this week, and that was a very good call. He delivered yet again with another 3 passing touchdowns. He also had nearly 400 yards. Definitely a good call to rank him top 10. If anything, I may have been too low. At number 10, we have Dak Prescott at the Jets. Even without CeeDee Lamb, he's still got it. He's looking good off of the leg surgery, and I think he's a very safe play all season, especially once Lamb comes back. Dak will be in the top 10 very consistently. But against the Jets, maybe Sauce Gardner can limit George Pickens a little bit more. But on paper, it is a top 11 matchup this season. The Jets have not had a good defense at all. So even though he doesn't run the ball, there is occasionally a rushing touchdown available for him, like last week. I have him in the same tier as Stafford. I anticipate the floor to be very high. I feel like 2 touchdowns is basically a guarantee for Dak this week. I really trust him. Maybe Javonte burns you on the ground. It could be a problem. But against the Jets, I expect more of a shootout than a low-scoring game. Their defense in Dallas always forces their hand. The offense has to step up. So Dak will start off red hot. I trust him. I think the floor is very safe. And just like Stafford, the upside is 30 points. Very good option in fantasy with Dak Prescott. At number 11, I have Bo Nix at the Eagles, and Nix did show up last week as expected. I ranked him top 10, told you to start him, and he was very good. Put up 25 fantasy points, at least in my scoring format. So that was a good call. It was a much better matchup, though, against Cincinnati. Pretty much a showcase game in primetime against a bottom feeder defense. Against the Eagles, it'll be a different story. So can't upgrade him against Philly. I'm not sure if this game is a shootout or a very low-scoring game. Both offenses and both defenses have the opportunity to play elite. So I want to temper expectations. There's always high upside, though, with Bo Nix, especially when he contributes on the ground. But he's been running a bit less this season, and that's where I don't know if he factors in with that elite ceiling in this matchup. So against the Eagles defense, I'll pump the brakes a little bit. Outside the top 10, but still worth a start. In the high-end streaming category this week, with 4 teams on bye and Lamar out, I think Bo Nix is a top 12 play this week on the road at the Eagles. I would probably keep him in the lineup, but if I had Drake Maye or Daniel Jones, I would definitely bench Bo Nix. At number 12, Baker Mayfield at Seattle. Can't feel ecstatic about him. There's just too many injuries in Tampa to feel super confident about the offense dropping 30 plus points. He's good enough, though, to keep him in the streaming territory. In general, 2 touchdowns is also a very safe bet to make with Baker Mayfield. So with no Bucky Irving, with no Mike Evans against the Seahawks elite defense, it's definitely a downgrade, but because he's Baker Mayfield, I can't count him out. In general, quarterback 12 is kind of the lowest I can go with Baker. He has top 4 upside any given week, and against Sam Darnold, the battle of the Panthers backups a few years ago, there is a chance for a shootout. But the Seahawks defense has been really good. They have to travel across country. Tampa just got banged up pretty bad by the Eagles. And even though Rachaad White contributes in the passing game, I could see Igbuka and Godwin locked up by those corners. So not expecting the highest upside. Baker should not be expected to put up his best game with all the injuries this week. So at number 12, still worth a start in a 12 quarterback league, but on the lower end of the spectrum, more of a streamer this week, more of a floor play against a good defense. At number 13, my favorite pickup off the waiver wire to plug and play would be Bryce Young versus Miami. The Dolphins matchup is the second best you can find, and definitely a spot to be upgrading any quarterback opposite them. There are some injuries in Carolina, most notably Chuba Hubbard will miss this game. So if anything, that means that Bryce has to throw the ball even more. He also contributes in the run department, and I mentioned it earlier, I do project him for a rushing touchdown this week. Just like last week and 5 times last year, I think he will run it in for a score. So I think the upside is pretty high. The floor is pretty safe. The Dolphins have given up 7 passing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns, and not a single interception this season. Another 41 rushing yards per game to the quarterback position as well. The floor is elite against Miami. The ceiling maybe isn't there because it's Bryce Young and he's generally capped for upside. But in terms of a lack of bust potential, I think Bryce Young is one of the safest backup quarterbacks you can start. In a Superflex league, I think the matchup makes him a lock in the lineup. In Superflex, you have to start Bryce Young. Even in 1 quarterback leagues, I think he's a top 14 play. The last guy I think would be a legit start in a 1 quarterback league would be Kyler Murray, my quarterback 14 this week versus the Titans. And Kyler has never been terrible this season, but he's also never been elite. He's been hovering around 16 fantasy points every single week. And given the injuries in the running back room, you would expect his hand is forced this week. He will run the ball a little bit extra. So I think the Titans are a decent matchup to chase after. There's really nothing scary about them. However, I just don't feel like Kyler has that 25-point ceiling. It's just gone. McBride rarely scores touchdowns. Harrison can drop passes and not contribute very much. It is a risky play to trust Kyler Murray. He's just not looking like an elite option in fantasy this season. But there's no chance he burns you. He's had a very consistent floor in every game. And he's also offering like 35, 40 rushing yards like clockwork every week. So if he doesn't turn it over, which I'm not expecting, then he does have a very safe floor. I don't see any scenario where you get burned with less than 10 points from Kyler this week. I think if anything, there's higher chances he gets closer to 20. I think 18 to 20 points is actually somewhat reasonable. I think it'll be his best fantasy game of the season, but good luck. He's just not been amazing this year. Pretty disappointing based on where you drafted him as a top 10 option. Moving forward, though, I think we're benching all these quarterbacks in 1 quarterback leagues. I just doubt you're in such a deep format where you have to do it. But in Superflex, I would still be starting these next 5 players. Jaxson Dart at the Saints does get an upgrade, a top 5 matchup on paper. However, I just don't really trust his passing ability, especially without Neighbors. That's just not a safe bet to know what you're going to get. And maybe Slayton and Wan'Dale do step up. But in general, this offense is mainly going through the ground game, and Scatterboo and Jaxson Dart are the main focal points in that regard. So he does offer a lot of scrambling ability. So similar to Kyler, I'm expecting about 40 rushing yards from Dart this week. But last week he didn't turn it over. That's pretty rare for a rookie quarterback. I would expect that to change on the road this week. It's not going to be the same situation. And I just don't feel like I have earned enough confidence to start Jaxson Dart no matter what. There's some better names to trust. There's some better matchups like Bryce Young against Miami. And although this is a very good matchup, I just don't feel like he's a lock in the lineup. So at QB 15, you could do far, far worse, but I think I would hold off in a one quarterback league. In Superflex, though, I would definitely start Jaxson Dart, especially in that format. Needs to be in the lineup. At 16, I'm worried about Jared Goff a little bit. He should play well. There is some very high upside for Goff this week. However, other than the game against Chicago, he's been really bad in fantasy. Just a floor play for about 12 fantasy points. And I just don't feel confident that on the road, the Lions have to throw the ball very much. Goff is extremely touchdown dependent because he doesn't run the ball at all. And the Bengals are one of the worst defenses at stopping the run. They just gave up 100 yards to J.K. Dobbins, the first 100-yard rushing running back in Sean Payton's tenure in Denver. So against Jahmyr Gibbs and Dave Montgomery, I think both of those guys are going off. If they hoard the touchdowns like they did against Baltimore, even if they drop 50 on the Bengals, you could get burned where Goff only has one touchdown. I doubt it. I expect at least two. And in general, Goff is just a very high variance player. It's just not the same equation without Ben Johnson, where every week you know for a fact he will play lights out. So I just worry about the game script going away from him. They're going to lead very, very heavy in this matchup. There's no way the Bengals can keep up with Detroit. And when that happens, they will hand the ball off. If all the touchdowns go away from him, you will get screwed with Jared Goff. But odds are that's not going to happen. Odds are the floor is very high. I want to rank him 5 spots higher, but I'm just worried because he's been so inconsistent this season. There is no upside if those touchdowns do not hit. This is a very good matchup for the running backs in Detroit. So that's my only concern. I want to rank him higher, but he has burned you 3 times this season. 3 out of 4. Can't feel good about that as a lock in the lineup. Number 17, I feel like Darnold is a very safe floor play this week versus Tampa. He's competent. There's no doubt about it. Darnold can play, but his arsenal of weapons is not as good as last year in Minnesota. And there's always the chance that the Bucs do step up on defense. They're pretty injured, so I do expect them to play well, try and give their offense a shot, and hold the Seahawks offense to a low score. But Seattle gets extra rest for this game. They're staying at home. Meanwhile, the Bucs have to travel on the road. And I do think there's some legitimate upside for a potential shootout. Baker can always keep up in the scoreboard. So I do like the potential for Darnold this week, but I just don't feel like the floor is very safe. The Bucs have a very good run defense though. So if they need to score a lot of points to beat Tampa, you would expect Darnold to have to step up. So I think he'll be good. I think JSN looks much better this week than he did last week. And I do think Darnold will play well, good enough to keep you from a bad fantasy week. I think the floor will be good for 16 points. Will he go over 20? I doubt it. I don't think there's 3 touchdowns available for Sam Darnold. I think he'll give you like 250 and 2 touchdowns, maybe a turnover, hopefully not 2. He also doesn't scramble enough to move the needle tremendously in that regard. He can run, but he doesn't always contribute in that category. Number 18, we got Geno Smith at the Colts, who does have talent, but he needs to stop throwing interceptions. He has 2 games this season with 3 picks. So against the Colts on the road, I'm not inspired. I don't feel good about it, especially with Brock Bowers not practicing this week. Not a good sign for Geno in this spot. So if he turns it over too much, you will get fucked, and I'm just going to pass. Unless it's a 2 quarterback format, I wouldn't start Geno, but odds are the floor is pretty safe for about 16 or so fantasy points. At number 19, I still don't feel confident enough in CJ Stroud to rank him as a must start. The matchup is top 3. The Ravens defense has been terrible this season, and they're also very injured. Some key starters are unavailable, but Stroud has a terrible offensive line. He also doesn't run the ball more than like 10 yards any single game. And that's just such a cap ceiling. Other than Nico Collins, I only trust Woody Marks in this offense. So the Texans offense in general is broken. Even with a elite matchup for Stroud, I just don't see enough reasons to force him in the lineup. He's been really bad in fantasy the last 2 seasons. I don't think it changes just because it's against Baltimore. You need 3 touchdowns for him to go off, and odds are the Texans can't offer more than one in the passing game. So no thanks with Stroud. I will pass. Not excited at all with Stroud this year. At 20, we're dropping down a tier, and all of these backup quarterbacks are very risky. I guess Rattler is not a backup, but he feels like one. At QB 20, I don't think I would start Spencer Rattler unless I was desperate in a 2-quarterback format. But the Giants are not a defense that scares you, especially playing at home. I think Rattler will play better. However, the Giants are just so bad against the run. I think this is mainly a game where you want to be starting Kamara and Kendry Miller. Rattler might be handing it off in the red zone all throughout the game. So I think they win. I think they're very competitive in this matchup, but I don't know if Rattler has earned your trust in the lineup. He still has limited upside. The touchdowns are pretty hard to come by, and I think they go on the ground to the running backs in this game. So not the highest ceiling, I'll still pass, but the floor I think is higher than general. The Giants don't really scare me too much other than their elite pass rush. They've been pretty bad on defense this year. At 21, we have Cooper Rush versus Houston, and I don't know what I'm getting in this offense with the backup quarterback. They have good weapons. A legit defense opposite them, though, is a major red flag. So against the Texans, I will pass on Cooper Rush, but I could see Flowers, Andrews, and even Rashad Bateman play very well. I could see the Texans really underestimate Rush. He has won a lot of games when he was the starter in Dallas under Mike McCarthy. There is some value here with Cooper Rush. At 22, I think Jake Browning bounces back a little bit, but mainly only ranking him here because of all the players unavailable and on bye. The Lions, are going to offer some garbage time to their opponent. So maybe he turns it over too much where he still gives you a bagel, but I doubt it. I expect garbage time Jamar Chase to pad the numbers. The Lions secondary doesn't scare me that much. They're better against the run, and the game script will force him to throw the ball. He used to have some decent stats 2 years ago as the starter. At some point, that might come back to him. I would expect that the Broncos matchup was a season low. I expect he will get better, but do I feel good about it? Not enough to start. Definitely benching Jake Browning. At number 23, I told you to bench Mac Jones last night, and damn, that was a bad call. I really underestimated him without Pearsall and Juwan Jennings. Very shocking last night. Honestly, Mac Jones earned a lot of my respect. Not only was he banged up and played through it, he looked amazing, shredding the Rams secondary. So love his connection with Kendrick Bourne dating back to New England. I wish I remembered that going into the game. I wish I would have started Kendrick Bourne. But Mac Jones looks legit. In Shanahan's offense, it feels like any quarterback can have success. So what a game. Definitely wrong to rank him this low. I apologize to Mac Jones. But the last 5 quarterbacks, I have no desire to even sniff the lineup. No chance I'm starting Trevor Lawrence. The Chiefs probably blow them out. And other than ETN, the Jags offense looks kind of broken. So not excited. Definitely no chance I'm starting Trevor Lawrence against the Chiefs. At 25, I'm not going to start Tua against Carolina. That's a bottom 5 matchup for quarterbacks this season. And without Tyreek Hill, the offense is nowhere near as scary. So without that deep threat, it's going to be a lot more dink and dunk. I think the Panthers will play well. Not going to trust Tua. There's always the risk he doesn't finish the game with a concussion. At 26 and 27, I'm going to completely steer clear of the Vikings-Browns game in London. So much defense in this game. The Vikings are also missing 3 starting offensive linemen, so Myles Garrett and the Browns defensive line will tee off here. Wentz is going to struggle and be running for his life all game long. There is a shot that Addison and Jefferson have some house calls, but beyond that, I have no confidence in Wentz. I expect some turnovers from him as well. A very bad play in London this week. I also have no desire for Dylan Gabriel in my lineup versus Brian Flores in his rookie debut. No fucking chance. I think it's going to be a lot of Quinshon Judkins in that matchup. And then lastly, we have Cam Ward at Arizona. Ridley probably doesn't play. Cardinals are well rested. They also get their top cornerback, Will Johnson, probably back. He was upgraded to limited in practice this week. I have no desire to trust Cam Ward. Feel like you're asking to lose. The Titans offense is just so bad. Hard to start any Titan in the lineup. Even Tony Pollard feels like a very risky option in fantasy. So those are my quarterback rankings, all 28 this week. And now let's move on to the tight end position, where I'm not going to go super in depth, but I would like to run through the best and worst matchups for the tight end position. We have 4 games, so it's starting to balance out. And I do think there is some merit to this chart now. And it's the same breakdown as the quarterback one. In blue, we have the tight end points per game. And then in red, how many of those points come strictly off of touchdowns. And it's very clear where most of the touchdowns have hit this season have led to the best matchups for the position so far this year. So on the slate this week, the best matchup is on bye. The Steelers have allowed 4 tight end touchdowns this season and have been giving up 15.7 points per game. They will come back from bye, and they will be the best matchup at the position. Number 2 would be Seattle, who have allowed 3 receiving touchdowns to tight ends this year. So Cade Otton does get a big upgrade, especially given the injuries. I actually think Cade Otton is a very legit plug and play off the waiver wire. We saw him have some very good value last year, but last week he didn't do much with his opportunity. Maybe you don't trust Otton as much as I do. I did upgrade him because of this matchup. At number 3, Miami is also a very good matchup. They get the Panthers, and Jatavion Sanders is out with a high ankle sprain. So Tommy Tremble played very well last week. He gets an upgrade. And they've also given up 2 receiving touchdowns to tight ends this season. Also a decent bet against the Dolphins. The next 5 defenses have also allowed 2 touchdowns, so they're all pretty legit. The Packers, though, are on bye. They're the next spot, so they'll come back soon, but not this week. Carolina has also been a very good matchup, so maybe Darren Waller gets back in the end zone. He gets an upgrade. The Bengals have also been bad against tight ends, so Sam LaPorta gets an upgrade, a decent shot for him to score his first touchdown of the year against the Bengals. And then Washington, the Commanders have been bad against tight ends, but the Chargers tight end core is not that trustworthy. Oronde Gadsden would be the only one I would even consider in the lineup. But the Patriots have also been bad against the position. 2 touchdowns on the year for them as well versus tight ends. And that means Dalton Kincaid is a very safe start this week. Definitely an upgrade in terms of matchups. The last 2 I want to mention have been much more vulnerable at giving up touchdowns, but one of them already played. The Niners did play on Thursday. Given the injury to Tyler Higbee, the Rams were unable to capitalize with their rookie, Terrence Ferguson. The Rams did not play well at tight end against San Francisco on Thursday. But lastly, the Lions are also an upgrade, a top 10 matchup this season, and they have allowed 3 receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends. So maybe Noah Fant will find pay dirt. I doubt you're going to trust him, but in general, the biggest upgrades go to Cade Otton, Tommy Tremble, Darren Waller, LaPorta, and Kincaid this week. I do think they are decent starts in your lineup. On the opposite side of the chart, let's bring up the worst matchups, though. Some definite downgrades. One of them is on bye. The worst matchup is Atlanta this season, only 2.7 points per game. They are on bye, thankfully. Philadelphia has also been very good at stopping tight ends so far, so Evan Engram gets a bad matchup here. I would not trust him. He had some drops last week that weren't encouraging. Buffalo has also been really good at stopping tight ends, but I think if you have Hunter Henry, you probably don't give a shit. I would still probably start Hunter Henry. Kansas City has also been very good against tight ends, so Brenton Strange, probably a downgrade. I doubt he finds the end zone against the Chiefs. Las Vegas also good at stopping tight ends, no touchdowns against them, so Tyler Warren probably does not score his first touchdown of the year this week. And then Cleveland has also been good at stopping tight ends. TJ Hawkinson fell off a cliff last week once Addison returned. I'm not starting Hawkinson against the Browns. Dallas Goedert has been on fire, 3 touchdowns in 3 games this year, and I do think he's probably still deserving of a top 10 ranking, but on paper, the matchup is a downgrade against Denver. They have yet to allow a single tight end touchdown so far. And then lastly, Houston is also a downgrade on paper against Mark Andrews. Maybe you don't trust him, but Cooper Rush, a big variable. In general, Andrews, not the safest start this week. However, let us move on. Let's rank the position. We're at number 1. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Jake Ferguson is just such a safe start. Without CeeDee Lamb, the volume's locked in. And even though last week was a rough matchup for him, he had 7 targets, 7 catches, and scored a touchdown. A lock in the lineup, a must start this week. He's my tight end 1 above guys like Trey McBride and Brock Bowers. But in this tier, I'm only putting McBride at number 2. And McBride is never a bust. You're not upset if you drafted McBride, but there's always just a little bit of upside left to be desired because he rarely ever scores touchdowns. So maybe with Benson going down, James Conner already on IR, perhaps they have no other choice but to target McBride in the end zone. I expect the floor to be bust-proof every week. You're expecting 10-plus points from McBride. Even without the touchdown, he's got to be in the lineup. So staying in the elite tier, but I think Ferguson has better touchdown odds. I'd rather go Jake Ferguson than Trey McBride in week 5. At number 3, we're dropping down a tier, and I think Zack Ertz is a lock in the lineup this week. There's no Terry, Debo isn't practicing, and Jayden Daniels is back on the field. No doubt about it, Zack Ertz is going to be a go-to option. He's always looked to in the red zone with Daniels. I expect that to repeat. I think Ertz is a must start. I think the touchdown's basically guaranteed. And unless the Chargers just bracket and double team him all game, even if they do, I still think he'll have a pretty good matchup here. So a must start. The injuries are piling up in Washington. Ertz is one of the healthiest weapons they have. At number 4, I have Hunter Henry at Buffalo. And like I mentioned, the Bills matchup is actually a downgrade, but I'm not going to panic. Henry has been really good this season, a top 3 tight end in full PPR formats. He is locked into the number 1 or number 2 target at worst for Drake Maye. I expect a shootout in this game, very high point total. I want to be starting pieces in this Bills-Patriots game on Sunday night. I think Hunter Henry will play well. And if we look at his last 3 games in division versus Buffalo, he's averaging 7.6 points per game on 6 targets, 4 catches for 36 yards, and has 1 touchdown in this sample size. The touchdown came last year when Drake Maye was his quarterback. So him and Drake Maye have elite chemistry. I love Hunter Henry this season. Feels locked into the top 10 going forward at the position. It's been a bit disappointing overall, but Hunter Henry has been a very good play so far this season. The only risk is if they pivot to Austin Hooper, which sometimes does happen, but in general, I trust Henry. Very safe floor, very high upside. Love him Sunday night against Buffalo. Number 5, in the same matchup, I have Dalton Kincaid versus New England, and he has 3 touchdowns in 4 games. Even though last week he only had 2 targets, he feels like the most consistent target in Buffalo to bet on. So I trust this game to be a shootout. I expect a lot of points from both sides. I want to be starting both tight ends on Sunday night on both sides of the ball. I want Hunter Henry and Kincaid in my lineup. I think both of them will be very good starts in week 5. At number 6 in this tier, I have Tyler Warren versus Las Vegas, who appears to be bust proof. Tyler Warren has 3 games with over 70 receiving yards, and that is phenomenal. Even without a touchdown, he is basically a pseudo Trey McBride. He's just a notch below Trey McBride. I was tempted to rank him in the same tier as Trey McBride, to be honest with you. So he's a lock in terms of top 10 tight ends this season. Maybe you're disappointed because he has not found the end zone, but I trust that the floor will be bust-proof every week. He's looking like the front runner for Offensive Rookie of the Year so far, but odds are that changes to a different player. I doubt it'll maintain, but he's still going to be in the running all season. He's a very important part of this passing game, and against the Raiders, I think the Colts are going to drop 40 points. I think they're going to really dominate the Las Vegas Raiders at home. I think Tyler Warren is a must start. The only reason he's not ranked higher is his lack of touchdown production. That's the only red flag you can think of. At number 7, we're dropping down a tier, and you're probably wondering, where is Brock Bowers? He has yet to practice all week. He's questionable with his knee injury, and that's been a problem since week 1. I think it's actually a very legit reason why he's not been living up to expectation. He's been much more mediocre than expected after going over 100 yards against the Patriots week 1. So not happy about it, but in reality, I think that's actually better for him if he sits out. You want him at full strength. So even if that takes a couple weeks, resting is going to be good for Brock Bowers. You don't want him to aggravate the knee and be out for the season. So I think it's good if he sits out this one. I doubt they're going to win even with him healthy. So I don't expect Bowers to play, but if he does, I don't think he's going to be the elite number 1 tight end as he has been so far in the ranks. I just don't think he's 100%. And there's no chance that he gives you the elite production that we remember from last year if he's not 100%. So not going to force him in the lineup if I don't have to, but at number 7, odds are you don't have a better option unless you picked up Zack Ertz or Hunter Henry off the wire, unless you drafted Kincaid as the backup. I doubt you have a better option than Brock Bowers. So still at number 7, still a high floor play, still a top 10 tight end this season, but with the knee injury, he's not locked to play. If he doesn't, you need to take him out of the lineup. For now, I'll rank him, but tomorrow I may be pulling him out if we get more context on his shot to play in week 5. I feel pretty bad about his upside. At number 8, I got Dallas Goedert, who's also questionable against Denver. He may not play. It's possible he doesn't suit up, but he's actually been the most consistent part of the Eagles passing game. So if he's on the field, I think you have to start him. He has 2 touchdowns last week, and on the season, he has 3 touchdowns in just 3 games. But he was held out in week 2. He's been injury prone throughout his career. That is a major problem for Goedert. He just can't stay healthy for too long. So if he's out, then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith feel like safer bets to make. But even if he is on the field, I think Goedert will be a big problem for them. I think he's a top 10 tight end. He's been way too productive this season to feel like you should bench him. So going to keep betting on him, but the injury has me downgrading him a few spots. I would have ranked him above Tyler Warren if not for the questionable tag. I'm not 100% sure he suits up. So good luck, but he's still top 10. I'd probably keep him in the lineup. And at number 9, Juwan Johnson, also questionable as well. He's dealing with an ankle injury. He did not practice on Wednesday, but limited both Thursday, Friday. I expect him to suit up. And I think at home, Rattler is going to play better. And Rattler has really loved to target Juwan Johnson. Last week, he only had 3 targets, but he was averaging 9 targets per game in his first 3 matchups. As long as he's healthy enough to play and finish the game, I would expect him to be a go-to target. But if he's not, I would definitely upgrade Olave and Shaheed. A player to monitor, I'll have more context tomorrow, and maybe I do not rank him after the injury updates, but for now, I think he's still top 10. The floor feels very safe to bet on. I still think he's worth a start. If you have him, he's been very productive all season. At number 10, we got Mark Andrews versus Houston. I think that's the last tight end you should be starting. Our concerns on Isaiah Likely did not prove to be legit. Likely was a complete non-factor last week, and with the backup quarterback Cooper Rush, a lot of the rush attempts that Lamar was offering turned into pass attempts. The volume probably goes up for Mark Andrews. There's also a bad matchup for Flowers on Derek Stingley. The tight end needs to contribute if they have a shot to win this game. So despite a slow start in the last 2 games, Andrews has 14 targets, 13 catches, 121 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's been way more consistent in the last 2 games. You've been kind of upset if you've been benching him. At least you were 2 weeks ago against Detroit. So I would keep him in the top 10. I know he gets a downgrade because of Cooper Rush, but in general, the volume kind of keeps it somewhat even. I think he's a fine start, and given he's not injured, maybe he should be ranked above Brock Bowers, Goedert, Juwan Johnson. But in the same tier, you could put him at number 7, and I wouldn't have a problem with it. I would not rank him above Tyler Warren, however. He is not a top 6 tight end, in my opinion. Somewhere between 7 and 10 is my projection on Andrews this week. A safe floor play, but maybe not elite without Lamar Jackson. Next up, though, we're dropping down a tier. I think we're in the clear streaming conversation. And because of how tight end operates, it's very touchdown dependent. I think there are 6 players you could look to start if you are in a tough spot. If you are without George Kittle or Tucker Kraft on bye, I would definitely start Sam LaPorta and these next 5 players. LaPorta has been a little disappointing. He's not the tight end 4 in fantasy like we drafted, but it's mainly because he does not score touchdowns, not a single touchdown this season. However, the floor is pretty decent. 4 targets in 3 straight games. It's not ideal, but he is catching pretty much all of them. I don't think you have to start him. If I had Zack Ertz, I'd definitely rather go with Zack Ertz. In this matchup against Cincinnati, he can capitalize. The Bengals are a top 5 matchup, and they just allowed 11 targets to Evan Engram and Adam Troutman last week. The tight end position has been pretty productive against Cincinnati. Against the Vikings, they allowed 2 touchdowns combined to TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver. The Bengals are bad at stopping tight ends, but do you trust Goff to throw multiple touchdowns when the run defense is so bad in Cincinnati? That's where I'm worried. and that's where I'm not convinced that LaPorta does crack the end zone for the first time this year. Without it, I don't think you go over 10 points. I don't know if he's a lock in the lineup without the touchdown. This week, it's a bit of a gamble, but in the top 11, definitely a relatively safe floor play. I'd still hold on to him, but you got to be a little bit upset with what you got after drafting LaPorta in the 7th round. He's not lived up to the draft capital. At number 12, Travis Kelce, also a little bit underwhelming, hasn't found the end zone since week 1, and with Xavier Worthy back, it's hard to find an excuse to force him into the lineup and expect elite production from Kelce. But he is catching what goes his way. The volume is just being spread around tremendously. And when Rashee Rice comes back, I would maybe hit the panic button. But until then, I would still keep Travis Kelce in the high-end streaming conversation. At number 12, odds are you'll keep starting him. But if this game was not in prime time, I'd be a bit worried that the touchdown is not going to hit. If anything, there's the Taylor Swift factor, and it feels like a dumb reason to upgrade him, so I'm not going to bump him up too much. But if there was a touchdown coming for Kelce, it wouldn't shock me in this primetime game on Monday. I do think he has some upside, but mainly just a floor option. At his age, he's not the same player we remember just 2 years ago. Those days are over. At 13, though, I think at this point, got to be desperate, got to be feeling the pressure. Let's look to the waiver wire and upgrade a guy like Cade Otton. The research says that Seattle is a top 2 tight end matchup this season. They've allowed 2 touchdowns to the position so far in 4 games, and then they're also giving up a shit ton of volume and yardage. So I believe that Cade Otton will step up. It's a very bad matchup for Ibuka and Chris Godwin. With Evans out, same with Bucky Irving. Somebody has to step up, and it can't just all go to Rachaad White. I do think Cade Otton is very live to score a touchdown in this game. I think it's a very decent bet to make. In a top 2 matchup, I'm willing to upgrade him up to tight end 13, but you could rank him anywhere in the top 20. I even mentioned it yesterday. Jake Tonjes could have been ranked this high, and Tonjes scored a touchdown. Tonjes was a very good play, so Otton is kind of in the same breath, but based on his upside from last year when he stepped up, I do see some legitimate extra production. If he has like 7 targets, it wouldn't shock me. I think Otton actually has a decent floor in this game. So my favorite streamer to pick up off the waiver wire this week, you might feel like it's a massive gamble because even last week he was ass and he has put up a bagel earlier in the season, but there's still production. Baker can send him a touchdown. I think Otton finds the end zone, and that's why I have him at tight end 13. I don't think it's a bad bet to be making at all with Cade Otton. At 14, I have Tommy Tremble of the Panthers versus Miami, and Tremble is definitely not a household name by any stretch, but Jatavion Sanders is out with a high ankle sprain. Last week, Tremble had 8 targets, 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. He had a good matchup as well, and the Dolphins are an elite matchup yet again. The Dolphins have given up a lot of yards to the position. Even last week, they gave up 65 to the rookie Mason Taylor of the Jets. So I see production en route to Tremble this week. I see at least 6 targets in his future. I think he's actually very underrated, and against the Dolphins, he will have a good contribution, in my opinion. Tremble and Otton are my 2 favorite streamers this week. It is because of the matchups. Both matchups rank top 3 against the position. These are the matchups you want to be chasing, and Tremble gets a good spot here. He also stepped up last year when Sanders was injured. I don't think his role is a fluke, and with Chuba Hubbard inactive in this game, they need all the help they can get. I do think Tremble will get the volume to keep him live in your lineup as a decent floor play. If he finds the end zone again, I wouldn't be that surprised. Very high upside with Tommy Tremble against the Dolphins. At number 15, I have Darren Waller at Carolina, who you probably picked up off the waiver wire after his 2 touchdowns in his debut. And I'm not expecting that to repeat. Definitely not 2 touchdowns too often. But just like Otton and Tremble, Waller gets a very good matchup. A top 5 matchup on the season with 2 teams on bye. It's actually top 3 on the slate this week, and Waller is definitely needed now that Tyreek Hill is gone. Definitely expecting a consistent target share to go to Waller. As long as he's healthy, he does factor in as a legit streamer, but I would like to see it one more time before I rank him in the top 10. He's a very good pickup. Maybe long-term value is higher than Otton and Tremble. If you wanted to start him, I think it's a very legit bet to make. Go ahead and start Waller if you need someone off the waiver wire. At 16, the last guy I think would be a decent plug and play is Brenton Strange, and he's at worst a very legit backup tight end to roster. 2 straight games with 7 targets and 6 catches, but he's also been vultured by Hunter Long twice this season for touchdowns, and I just don't think that that's his role. He's not the go-to option in the red zone. They also rarely throw touchdown passes in Jacksonville in the first place, so mainly he's just a floor play, but I think he's also a very bust-proof option in that regard. Very unlikely he goes under 6 or 7 fantasy points in half PPR. In full PPR, you can kind of expect 10 pretty easily. The volume is definitely there for Brenton Strange. I think he's a safe option, but pretty capped upside. The touchdowns are hard to come by in Jacksonville. Next up, though, these next 3 I think are not worth starting, but maybe you could argue they should be rostered. Chigo Okonkwo at Arizona probably gets a lot of volume this week because Ridley is not a lock to play. Ridley missed 2 practices this week and barely was limited on Friday. So if he's out, Ayamanor gets a bad matchup. Someone has to catch passes. And so far, Okonkwo is the next man up. He has 19 targets on the season, so roughly 5 targets per game. 2 weeks ago, he caught 5 for 66, so he can put up decent numbers. In Tennessee, there's no touchdown upside, however, and that's why I just don't see him above the tier break. I kind of view him just like Strange, but then the Titans offense is less valuable. So behind the tier break, but in a similar breath as someone like Brenton Strange. At 18, we have TJ Hawkinson versus Cleveland. He has 1 good game on the season. Otherwise, he's been ass. And with Addison coming back, he really reverted back to a low-end option. So not going to trust him with Wentz going up against an elite defense, not encouraged. And the Vikings are also without 3 starting offensive linemen. So if anything, the tight ends are going to have to block a little extra in this game. I don't think he runs as many routes as we saw 2 weeks ago when he scored a touchdown against Cincinnati. Not expecting the world from Hawkinson. Definitely not a good start against the Browns, in my opinion. The Evan Engram experience looked kind of interesting last week. 7 targets for him in a very good matchup against Cincinnati. But if you watch this game closely, Adam Troutman was actually way more involved in the first half than Engram. Engram also dropped a pass. He caught one with a foot out of bounds. It was very frustrating. He had 7 targets. He only caught 4 for 29 yards, and he should have had 6 for way more yardage had he just been competent on those other 2 plays. So that was unfortunate. Engram kind of let me down, but he's okay. This matchup, though, is bottom 2, and if anything, the stats are saying do not start tight ends against the Eagles. So not going to bet on him. I think the touchdown is a very bad bet to make. If you have him, you can hold on to him, but if you wanted to drop him to clear some space, go ahead. I'd rather be starting Cade Otton or Tommy Tremble this week than Evan Engram. Good luck with Engram. At 20, I did tell you Tonjes was in the streaming conversation, but he was better than this ranking. Kittle probably comes back next week, though, so to pick him up just for 1 week, not much value beyond this point. Kind of felt not worth it, but that is his 3rd touchdown on the season. If Kittle continues to miss time, Tonjes will be ranked higher next week. At 21, Theo Johnson also scored a touchdown last week. He does have some chemistry with Dart. Even in the preseason, they looked good together, but Theo Johnson not getting enough volume to trust. He might factor in soon, but not enough to start. A sneaky pickup, but you could keep him off the wire, and it would be justified. At 21, definitely not going to trust Theo Johnson, but I am keeping an eye out for him. He is on the watch list for sure. At 22, Mason Taylor had a very good game, but in a very good matchup against Miami last week, and I'm not expecting 65 yards to repeat, but he does have 13 targets over the last 2 games. So if you're going to average 6.5 targets, that will have value. He is questionable, though, dealing with an ankle injury from the preseason. He is not 100% in practice. I think he'll play, but I want to see it happen again in order to even pick him up. I think last week was mainly the matchup. Against Dallas, it's more of a neutral test. So if he plays well, then maybe he's a legit pickup. After all, the Jets don't have many weapons other than Garrett Wilson. Who else are they going to throw the ball to? Mason Taylor does have a role rest of season. A player to keep in mind, but not ready to start him this week against the Cowboys. The last 3 players to mention, all big gambles. Harold Fannin and David Njoku, I am not going to start this week. I think if you wanted to drop them, that's definitely a decent thing to do. And given Dillon Gabriel is the quarterback, I have no idea what to expect. So it could be a good option for the tight ends. Maybe they have better chemistry with Gabriel than they did with Flacco, but it also could be terrible. Gabriel might not like to throw it to the tight end position at all. And it's also possible that he favors one of these guys way more than the other, and we don't know who that is. So Njoku so far seems to be behind Fannin on the depth chart, but they're both still relevant. Njoku is questionable though, so if he doesn't play, maybe Fannin is more attractive. But until I know what Gabriel's offense looks like, there's no chance I'm starting a Browns tight end if I don't have to. No doubt about it. They are risky as fuck against the Vikings in Gabriel's debut. And then lastly, I wanted to rank Noah Fant in the top 25, not because I think you should start him, but because the matchup is an upgrade. It does rank top 10, and Detroit has given up 3 touchdowns to tight ends on the season. If anyone would score this week, there are some decent bets that it would be Noah Fant against Detroit. So garbage time factors in. He did miss last week with a concussion, but otherwise he has 14 targets in 3 games. If he's offering 5 targets again, that does have some value. It's enough to rank, but at 25, it's not impressive. There's a lot of tight ends on bye, so not excited to trust Fant in week 5. That's it for the tight end rankings. Let's wrap up this video with defense, where number 1 is the Cardinals. The Titans are the worst team in the league, and Calvin Ridley might not even play. So in general, you want to be chasing this matchup, but as they get cornerback Will Johnson back on the field, probably you definitely feel even more confident about it. This is the best matchup to chase all season. The Titans look like shit. So maybe if they fire their head coach, things will change, but the Cardinals with extra rest should play well. In my opinion, it's pretty obvious they're clearly the number 1 streaming defense in week 5. At number 2, I have the Vikings versus Cleveland, and Brian Flores gets a 3rd-round rookie quarterback making his debut in his first career start. Sign me up. Definitely start the Vikings against the Browns. Number 3, the Browns in this same game, I think are also a lock in the lineup, but I have them a tier below of Minnesota. The Vikings offensive line is missing 3 starters, so Wentz will be running for his life against Myles Garrett and company. They will get plenty of sacks, and the only risk here why I didn't rank him above the Vikings is because you never know if Jordan Addison or Justin Jefferson will break open some deep touchdown house calls. So that's the only concern. Wentz did throw for 350 yards last week, but I still think the Browns are a very safe play. They have an elite defense, very well coached, and with the injuries to the Vikings O-line, they should step up, kind of similar to the Giants last week against the Chargers. I think the Browns defense looks really good against Carson Wentz, a top 3 option in my opinion. At number 4, damn, I was wrong. I told you to start the Rams. I started them in one of my leagues, got -2 points, so I paid the price, and Mac Jones deserves credit. The Rams did not show up to play on defense against McCaffrey and a bunch of backups. Pretty disappointing. Honestly, pretty embarrassing that they lost that game to all of those backups. So when you consider the context of them being a top 5 fantasy defense entering the week, it felt like a no-brainer. I was dead wrong. A very bad call to rank the Rams top 4 in week 5. At number 5, I do have the Chiefs at Jacksonville, and this game has blowout potential. I have no faith in the Jags offense. If you can stop Travis Etienne, then I think you remove the head from the snake. The Jags offense will look like shit. So I think the Chiefs are a must start in primetime. I think they play very well. Chiefs are top 5, in my opinion, in week 5. At number 6, the Lions at the Bengals get a big upgrade. The Bengals offense is trash, and maybe garbage time Jamar Chase does burn you, but in general, they should be a very safe play. Betting against Jake Browning feels like a very safe bet to make. So the top 6, I think, are all locks in the lineup, but I was wrong about the Rams. Maybe I'm wrong about somebody else, but it's 7 through 11. I think these are the other defenses I'd be more comfortable starting as a streaming option. The Colts versus Las Vegas, Genti could be a problem, but now Bowers is questionable. Geno has 2 games with 3 interceptions. I think you should start the Colts defense at home against Las Vegas. The Raiders are not an offense that really scares you. At number 8, we have the Panthers versus Miami. And without Tyreek Hill, the deep threat is out of the equation. The Panthers have played well, especially at home. They shut out the Falcons 2 weeks ago. So I think Tua will make some mistakes as always. Expect at least one turnover, and potentially it turns into a pick six house call. I do think the Panthers have pick six potential against the Dolphins. Their secondary is good. From a floor standpoint, I think they're a very safe bet in week 5. At number 9, I got the Texans at Baltimore, and they're a very good unit, so in general, you want to start them. But I'm not convinced that it's an elite upgrade just because Cooper Rush is the quarterback. Obviously, without Lamar, though, it's definitely a better spot to bet on. So the Texans, I think, are a safe top 10 floor play, but from an upside standpoint, I could see that not be there. I doubt you get burned, but it's always possible that Derrick Henry has some house calls and they do give up a shit ton of points because Henry is just so good. Cooper Rush has played well, has won in the past with Dallas. I think the Texans are safe in fantasy, but not the best play. Can't rank him above some of the other teams I have in the top 8. At 10-11, though, the Saints and Giants game is very interesting. Kind of a weird matchup where I doubt it's a shootout, but that is possible. I could get burned with this rank, but I think in general you want to be betting against a rookie quarterback as well as Spencer Rattler. So I expect some turnovers from both sides. I think the Saints are going to win, so that's my tiebreaker. And without Malik Neighbors, you definitely feel more confident in trusting the Saints defense. But at some point, the rookie quarterback Jaxson Dart will turn it over. Unless Scatterbo just torches you, I think the Saints have some upside. But the Giants definitely have a safe floor against Spencer Rattler. In general, that's a safe bet to make. But this game is sneaky high scoring. I think the Giants' run defense is so bad that Kendry Miller and Alvin Kamara will score touchdowns. And I could see the final score being like 30-28. Not my favorite bet, but also a weird enough matchup with bad quarterbacks where I do think both have legit streaming value in week 5. You could do way worse than the Saints or the Giants. This next tier, however, is made up of 5 defenses who I don't think you're going to drop. And in general, you probably just want to hold strong and start through this week if you don't have the space to pick up a backup. But I do prefer a lot of other streaming options. I think you can find a better start off the wire this week, but the Eagles, Chargers, Seahawks, Bucks, and Broncos have very tough matchups. Let's start with the Eagles, who get Denver. Denver's offense is underrated. The Eagles could definitely give up a shootout here. I could see you get burned by the Eagles defense, but in general, they've been really consistent all year. They also have good special teams, so maybe they find the end zone off a blocked kick or something. I don't think I want to fade them too much, but at number 12, you don't have to start them if you have a better option off the wire. You can probably get that pretty easily. So not excited with the Eagles, but still a probably safe floor play. And same goes with the Chargers versus Washington. Jayden Daniels is a problem, but Terry is out. Debo probably misses as well. And Dart kind of embarrassed them. I think they will step up this week at home. But one problem for them has been running quarterbacks. If Jayden Daniels scrambles for like 80 yards this week, I wouldn't be shocked. The floor should be high. The Chargers are really talented, but I don't think they give up 30 points to Jayden Daniels. I think the floor for them is pretty high, but probably not an elite ceiling against a good quarterback like Jayden Daniels. Probably not the best start you can find this week. At 14, I have the Seahawks versus Tampa Bay, and Baker is never an ideal matchup to chase. So this tier has all the good defenses and bad matchups, and right behind them, I have the Bucks in the same game at Seattle. So I think you can find a better option, but both have played very well this season. There's a chance this game is very low scoring, but odds are it's more of a shootout. I'd rather avoid both defenses if I can. And same goes for the Broncos, even though they're a very good defense. Against the Eagles, how lucky do you feel? I'd rather not bet against Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. So even if the secondary locks up A.J. Brown, they could still give up 30 points. Not my favorite start. Definitely not as safe as they were last week against the Bengals. These next 4 are the only other ones I would consider in a super deep format, but odds are you're going to keep them on the waiver wire. The Commanders have not played well this season, but the Chargers have a mess at offensive line. There is some potential that there's a lot of sacks in this game. Maybe Herbert throws more interceptions like last week when he was heavily pressured. I don't want to start the Commanders, but I do think they're top 20 this week against the Chargers. The Titans feel disgusting to start, so definitely not going to rank him too high. But the Cardinals offense doesn't scare you without any legit running backs. There's also a higher floor. They just suck so bad, though. No thanks. I'm probably not starting them if I don't have to. Ravens versus Houston have been hot garbage on defense this year, but the Texans have been even hotter garbage on offense. So maybe it cancels itself out and the Ravens do deserve an upgrade, but they also have a lot of injured key starters on defense. Roquan Smith, Marlon Humphrey. They're not a safe bet at all. They have given you negative points multiple times this season. I'm not going to start them if I don't have to, but the Texans are a matchup in general I would like to chase. The Dolphins, the last one I'd even consider, but they're so bad on defense, it sounds so insane to do. Against Carolina, though, they're very injured, and maybe the Dolphins keep it close, keep it low scoring. I doubt it, though. I wouldn't start the Dolphins if I don't have to. The Jags against the Chiefs, fuck no. It's probably a blowout against Mahomes, so no chance I'm starting them. The Niners, I underestimated, but the Rams did have a lot of yards and touchdowns last week, so maybe they weren't the best start, but did impress me against the Rams. Some key turnovers in key spots. The Jets and Cowboys game is probably going to be all offense, so no thanks with either of them. And same goes for the Bills-Patriots game, a massive shootout, high point total, fuck no, with the Bills and the Patriots. Lastly, though, the Raiders and Bengals are my bottom two defenses this week. The Colts probably drop 40 on the Raiders, and then the Lions probably drop 50 on Cincinnati. No fucking chance am I starting the bottom four in these rankings. So these are my rankings, though, in week 5. I feel very confident in the top 8 quarterbacks. Once we hit Stafford through Kyler, that's the streaming conversation. And I do think the floor is very high. I don't think you're going to get burned with less than 16 points from any of these players. But there is still some upside for guys like Jaxson Dart and Jared Goff. Kind of tricky to know exactly what you're going to get. Very touchdown dependent options. And maybe it's just a little too rich for my liking. But Darnold, Geno, and CJ Stroud have decent matchups. I think the floor for them is also pretty high. Only once we hit Rattler and beyond would I definitely bench them in a 2-quarterback league. But if you have the top 4 quarterbacks, I think you're going to crush this week. I love Drake Maye and Justin Fields. They're going to be really dominant must starts in week 5. Those are the best of the best. I kind of wanted to rank them above Josh Allen, to be honest with you, but didn't do it. Not bold enough to do that. Allen has to stay at number 1. At tight end, I think there's some really good options with guys like Zack Ertz, Hunter Henry this week, but Bowers is injured, so is Goedert and Juwan Johnson, so they lose some value, more like low-end top 10 plays, but if you have them and they start, I think you have to put them in the lineup. And then once we hit LaPorta, the top 16, I think are mainly just flex plays, but there is some good matchups for guys like Otton and Tremble. Even Waller and Strange have very legit value this week. You could do way worse at tight end if you're in a jam and you're looking to the waiver wire. The tight end position is actually kind of loaded, even with Tucker Kraft and Kyle Pitts on bye. But once we hit Chigokonko, I think it's a little too risky. I'd probably bench everyone, and I don't think I would roster anyone beyond Evan Engram. But they do have watch list value. I do think you can keep an eye out them. I wouldn't be shocked if next week they were very good targets off the waiver wire. At tight end, though, I think I only trust the top 11 defenses, but numbers 12 through 16 have a lot of talent. Their matchups are bad, but you could start them and get away with it. I was dead wrong about the Rams, but I feel like the top 6 are the best options this week. The Cardinals, Vikings, Browns, Chiefs, and Lions all have very good matchups, in my opinion. But the Colts or the Giants, very safe floor plays. I think those are the better streamers. If you had a team like the Chargers or Eagles this week and you wanted a safer bet, I'd rather start the top 11, but I don't think I would drop the Eagles through Broncos in the top 16. I think I would hold on to them on the bench if I could. Rostering 2 defenses is a very legit strategy in general. That is what I like to do in my lineups. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you next time. My name is Adam Rancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.